Hello and welcome, Woodrow Wilson friends, family, and students. This is Miss Fields here, and I'm joining you for our 9th episode of Math Toolbox. Tonight we're going to be discussing how to accurately compare and order decimals. Now, we are entering a new unit in our mathematical studies. In previous units, we studied order of operations, multi-digit multiplication, multi-digit division, and now we are moving into numbers that are less than 1, so decimals. We are going to be comparing decimals up to the thousandths place. So we learned 3 new place values. The first place value after the decimal is the tenths. The second place value after the decimal is the hundredths. And the third is the thousandths. So I'm going to be showing you guys tonight how to compare decimals, 2 decimals at a time, as well as 3 decimals at a time in ordering from least to greatest. So typically when you're comparing 2 decimals, you're going to be asked a problem as shown right here. Compare the decimals below. So the 2 decimals that we have are 1 and 472 thousandths and 1 and 427 thousandths. Notice that I didn't say point. I didn't say 1.42472. I didn't say 1.427. We're going to be pronouncing our decimals as and from now on, and we are also going to be pronouncing the second half of the number as a complete unit, so 472 thousandths or 427 thousandths. Super important in 5th grade that we start speaking like mathematicians, and that helps us understand which place value is which. So in class we learned a call and response. And when the teacher says place values, the students say line them up. And what we mean by that is we make sure that all of the place values in both sets of numbers are completely lined up. Notice my ones place is perfectly stacked on top of the other. My decimal is perfectly stacked on top of the other decimal. My tenths place is perfectly stacked up. My hundredths place is perfectly stacked up. And my thousandths place is perfectly stacked up. Now, it's super important that when you're comparing and ordering decimals that you are organized. Organization is key to being successful at comparing and ordering. So after we say place values, line them up, we do a super fun army chant, left, 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 right, left. However, we're not going to be going back and forth from left to right. It's just a fun thing to help us get engaged and excited about comparing and ordering decimals. However, we will be comparing from left to right. And if you follow the arrow, left is over here. We'll be starting with our ones place, and then we'll be moving to the right, which is over here with our tenths place, hundredths place, and thousandths place. So one organizational technique that I like to use when I'm comparing decimals from left to right is circling the place value that I'm focusing on. So notice I've circled my ones place right here with this yellow circle. And now I'm going to be looking specifically at the value of each of these digits. So I see in my ones place I have a 1, but also in the other decimal I have a 1 at the same time. So what I do next when I'm organizing my comparison is if I've got digits that are the exact same value, I cross them off and I move to the next place value. So my ones place, digits are exactly the same. No worries, go to the next place value, which is the tenths place, and compare from there. Now, I see that I have a 4 and a 4. Again, that means that this place value has digits of the exact same value. They're exactly equal. So just like I did with my ones place, I'm going to cross off my tenths place, showing that there is no difference in value up to that place value. Moving on to the hundredths place, however, I see that I have a 7 and I also have a 2. Now that tells me this digit 7, the decimal above 1 and 472 thousandths is greater than the decimal below, which is 1 and 427 thousandths. Now when we put it all together, what I like to do is I like to circle the decimal of greater value. And when I put it back together to answer the question was, or the statement was, compare the decimals below. I'm going to put my decimal of greater value on the left, which it already was previously. And I'm going to use the greater than symbol to represent that it's bigger than the other decimal. Now, you can look on our Facebook page. I posted a video called The Hungry Alligator. So it's a super fun song that helps remind us which symbols go with what decimals. So this greater than symbol always faces towards the decimal of the greatest value. And in the song, it talks about how the hungry alligator always eats the value that's greater. And so you want to pretend like this is a hungry alligator. But that being said, if we were to read this statement backwards over here, when the alligator is facing away from the decimal, you read it as 1 and 427 thousandths is less than 1 and 472 thousandths. However, this week we didn't just compare two decimals. We actually compared up to 3 decimals. And whenever you encounter a problem of this nature, it's going to say something like, list the decimals from greatest to least, or maybe list the decimals from least to greatest. In this problem in front of us, however, we've got greatest to least. Now, greatest means biggest, and least means smallest. So you're going to want your greatest decimals on the left side, and your smallest decimals on the right side. Now, as I said before, we start off by saying place values, line them up, make sure your ones place is perfectly aligned, decimals perfectly aligned, tenths place perfectly aligned, hundreds place perfectly aligned, and thousands place perfectly aligned. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, Ms. Fields, what's going on right here? How are we going to compare this decimal to anything if there's nothing there? So what I've told my students and what I'm telling you tonight is, if there's a blank space there, what you can do is you can insert a 0 and it does not affect the value of the decimal. Any 0 after the decimal place does not change the value of the number. So you could add as many zeros to this number as you possibly want and it doesn't change the value. So if we had to compare the hundredths place and 3 and 8 tenths, we could just tack on some zeros and figure out which decimal is greater, which decimal is smaller. So place values, line them up, then compare from left to right. Follow that arrow from left to right. So again, when we're comparing from left to right, we're going to be comparing the ones place first, if that's the first place value on the left. Now, remember, think back to what the problem was asking you. It was asking you to compare the decimals from greatest to least, so biggest to smallest. So when we're looking at these digits, we've got a 3, and a 6. I know from first grade the difference between a 3 and a 6, and I know that a 6 is bigger. So automatically we have found our decimal of greatest value, and that's going to be 6 and 52 thousandths. So off to the side, if I'm comparing up to 3 or 4 or 5 decimals, what I'm going to do is I'm going to circle that number, and I'm going to put its place off to the side. So I know this is number 1. This is the biggest decimal that we have. From there, I'm going to compare the other 2 decimals. So I see in our ones place the 3's exactly the same value. So we compare from left to right. We're going to move over to the tenths place, and we're going to see if there's a difference in value. Again, 0 and 8, when we compare those 2 numbers, we can obviously see that 8 is bigger than 0. I'm going to want $8 over $0. So we know that 3 and 8 tenths, even though it doesn't have 3 digits after the decimal, it only has 1, this is the second largest decimal. And from there, we're going to look up here. This is our leftover decimal, 3 and 71 thousandths. We know that that is the smallest decimal. So we're going to put this 3 right here to signify that this is the smallest decimal, and 6 and 52 thousandths is the largest decimal. Now when we put it all together, listing the decimals from greatest to least, we're going to put our greatest decimal on the left side. And remember, the hungry alligator eats the value that's greater. So this greater than symbol is going to be facing towards 6 and 52 thousandths. From there, we're going to place our second greatest decimal, which is 3 and 8 tenths, in the middle. Notice the hungry alligator is facing away from 3 and 8 tenths, and that's because 3 and 8 tenths is less than 6 and 52 thousandths. But moving over here, when we compare these 2 decimals, 3 and 71 thousandths is less than 3 and 8 tenths. Hungry alligator wants to eat 3 and 8 tenths over 3 and 71 thousandths. Now, if we were to read this in reverse, we would say 3 and 71 thousandths is less than 3 and 8 tenths. 3 and 8 tenths is less than 6 and 52 thousandths. Thanks for joining me tonight for our 9th episode of Math Toolbox on comparing and ordering decimals. The key to success with comparing and ordering decimals really is just organization. So if you see place values, line them up, then compare from left to right, and make sure that you're crossing off decimals that you've already written down, and make sure that you're writing off to the side the order of each decimal, whether it's the greatest or whether it's the least. Thanks again for joining me, friends, and I can't wait to see you on Monday morning. Have a great night.